Joining me for the opening convocation today is Commissioner of Higher Education and Workforce Development, Dr. Bennett Boggs. Dr. Boggs came to MDHEWD from the Colorado Department of Higher Education, where he served as the Deputy Executive Director as well as Chief of Staff to the Executive Director. Prior to his role in Colorado, Dr. Boggs worked across many areas of higher education, including the National Conference of State Legislatures, the Kentucky Educational Professional Standards Board, the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education, and the Kentucky General Assembly. Dr. Boggs also has experience working with both public and private institutions of higher education. Long story short, this guy knows what he's talking about, and we are so lucky to have him here with us. Dr. Boggs earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from Wake Forest University, a master's of education from the College of William and Mary, and a PhD in higher education policy studies from the University of Virginia, and he completed the Institute for Management and Leadership in Education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Thank you, Dr. Bennett Boggs, so much for being here with us today.
Matt, thank you very much. Thank you for that generous introduction. He sounds like a heck of a guy. We'll see how he does. But thank you for your time in preparing for today's events and emceeing us, guiding us through some fantastic conversations. And if I may take a point of privilege, I'd like to thank Samantha Dickey and her staff here, the Department of Higher Ed and Workforce Development, pulling all this together. Great opportunity for us to talk about this very important topic in terms of rural education and how we can better serve Missourians in these areas. This is important work. And I'd like to, if I may, just take a moment or two and talk a bit about what I see as how this is a very important topic for us. And one is our Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. We were merged in 2019. We're only one of two such structures in the entire nation as far as state departments that work in this manner. The other one is out of Oregon. And hey, you never know. You never know. Hey, I won the lottery. I'll see you guys later. Where I was that Oregon is also structured like we are, and the way that played out is they were put together for administrative purposes in terms of just general budgeting. They really didn't organize, and they haven't organized programming the way we have. So our department really is committed to not just being a merged, but an integrated department. And the whole purpose here is that you see the importance of workforce preparedness. Not only how do we serve Missourians in terms of critical job opportunities at the moment and at the present, but how do we prepare for the future? How do we position Missouri to be a place to attain and grow and draw additional industries and to prepare Missourians to face that be prepared for that future. So when that was put together, one of the first things the department did was put together a strategic plan. And in that strategic plan that now guides the department, there are sections put together for higher education attainment and also workforce participation, and approved by our coordinating board in consultation with the State Workforce Development Board. And the whole idea behind it is a skilled, prepared workforce is necessary for the future of Missouri. Our educational attainment goals for 2030 is 60% statewide. We want to be statewide where Missourians have something beyond high school. It can be a certificate, a credential, an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, or beyond. And currently, we are right around 52%. Not bad, not bad. But the last 7-8% is going to be that tough type to get. So how do we get from 52, 53 to 60? Here's the thing. In our rural communities, we are around 29%. 29%. So we're only about halfway there for our rural communities. And our labor force participation target is at 70% statewide. And right now we're about 64%, 65%. Again, those last 6-7% is the tough one to get. Our rural communities on workforce participation is at 58%. And again, that's not bad. 58% is not bad, but it's not where we need to be. We've had some outside consultants take a look at some of this for us. And in terms of educational attainment, our rural communities are trending in the right direction. The things are working well. People understand and are catching on, but they're not catching on fast enough. So even if we continue our current trends, we need to find another 105,000 Missourians to go ahead and get something beyond high school, get on a pathway that gives them some kind of certified credentialed skill set beyond high school. We want to try to get that all worked out and underway well before 2030. So along with that, another point I wanted to make is overall we know that for all upcoming jobs, 64% of all the good jobs coming up in Missouri require something beyond high school, 64%. And we know that between forestry, mining, agribusiness, these are among the top three industries of Missouri. And these are really rural focused industries. So we must find a way to reach out to our rural communities and find ways to form partnerships. As I look at this, though, there are three barriers that I want to draw on. We have geographic barriers, we have financial barriers, and we have cultural barriers when we try to reach out to rural communities. Now, geographic barriers just show that research nationally shows that even since the 1980s, 60% of all incoming students, they attend a college within 50 miles of their home. You know, we talk about the big schools you see on Saturdays playing football, and that's all great and good. But the real workhorses in higher education are those regional universities. And that's where the majority of our populations go, particularly in our rural communities. They'll go to the regional university, and also our community colleges and the great workhorses they are in terms of workforce training and the work that goes on there. But anything much beyond 25 miles is really a long way to go if you live in a rural community. You've been working all day and now you got to make a 50-mile round trip to get to an evening class. That's a long way to go. And we've often called those places where you have to go more than 25, 30 miles, we call them educational deserts. So we have to find ways to overcome those geographic barriers. Of course, the pandemic showed all of us that technology can help and online learning can help. And I do want to give a shout out to the Missouri Digital Equity Plan, that we have made great strides in improving digital connectivity across the state. And I think we've probably heard also from our governors invested in enhancing Interstate 70 entirely across the state, adding another lane all across the state. And while they're doing that, they've already had plans to be laying additional digital cable so that we can provide better technology statewide. So we are planning ahead and we're investing in the future, but we got to make sure we can get there and do that soon enough. The second barrier I'd like to touch upon is the financial one. And here, I think we have to understand that the state does provide rather generous financial aid when you put it all together, but it's hard to get the word out there. Do our high school counselors have the resources? Do they know that information? Do we make that available? The other thing to remember is attending tuition costs really is about 40% of the total cost. And so when you're talking about our rural communities, you still need to talk about increased gas prices to drive to class or get to class. You got to talk about child care. You have to talk about all those hidden expenses you haven't counted upon. So it's not just a matter of sitting in the classroom. What does it take to get there and to get back home, and what else is going on that increase additional costs? Another thing to touch on in that is, the importance of FAFSA. And we have a lot of programming here in the department on how to increase FAFSA participation. We reach out to our partners in DESE and the K-12 districts. But unfortunately, in the federal level, they've counted farm assets against the cost of expected family contributions, what they now call the Student Aid Index. That's got to change, and I'm sure there's other states that would join us in terms of our rural communities. We can't be having farm assets counting against the families as we're trying to find ways to help them afford a post-secondary participation in some form. The last thing I wanted to speak about in terms of our barriers is probably the most admirable, and that is we have some cultural challenges. Our rural communities, and those of us who have grown up in rural communities understand this. Our rural communities, and research backs this up, there's a real loyalty to family. There's a feeling among our rural communities that, hey, if I go off to college, who's going to check on my grandma on the way? If it's snowing, who's going to shovel her driveway? Who's going to make sure everything's okay with her? There's a loyalty to family in our rural communities that's fantastic. And we have to find a way in higher education to work with that, not against it. Also, part of that is parents saying, hey, if my kids go off to college, are they going to come home? I want to see my grandbabies. And if they take off and head to St. Louis or Kansas City, what does that mean for me? And what does that mean for our family and our businesses here? So there's a loyalty to family. There's also a commitment to place. Rural communities are often tight communities, and generations of families have lived there and established a sense of identity and belonging. And there's a sense of closeness and responsibility to each other, as neighbors. And so many of the people that we try to target to say, hey, come on and participate, we can help you get ahead. But they're saying, well, if I leave, even if I'm doing to improve myself, am I not neglecting my neighbors here? Am I not shunning my duty to look after my town? So we have to find ways. We're not, you can't. There's no way we're going to overcome those kind of beautiful virtues by saying we've got a better idea. What we need to do is say, how can we work? How can we come to you? How can we help you invest in your home? How can we help strengthen what you want to accomplish for your family and for your community? I think Representative Shields, I believe you're with us, and I'd like to take a second to recognize you and thank you for your work with our Education Committee, and give you a moment to please say a few words.
Well, you've actually touched, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. And you've actually touched on a lot of the things that I work on and I care about. Whether you are our flagship university, one of our regional universities, or a 2-year college, you play an important role in how we can improve our state. And we all have to work collaboratively to make that happen. I actually live in rural Missouri. I live in Northwest Missouri. And today, I was telling the commissioner this, today's a great day. I have not had access to high-speed internet forever. I have micro radio line of sight internet. I was having trouble getting on today. It didn't like me. I didn't hear some of your beginning remarks. At 11 o'clock today, I joined the rest of you with some high-speed fiber because the state has invested a lot of dollars to make sure our rural communities can be connected to their universities and not have to be inside the buildings inside of our universities. So I won't be on the call all day today because my little line of sight internet will be turned off while they spend a couple hours connecting me to fiber. So I'm excited for that. I thank you. I can't thank you enough for being here today. I'm looking forward to the time that I get to stay on the call and continue to learn with the rest of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your presence and for participating as you can. And congratulations on the enhanced connectivity. And
exciting. I can do more than I mean, lots of times I'm like delayed by many seconds when I'm on some of these calls. So, and my computer wouldn't let me log in. I'm finally on my phone to do this. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Matt, let me wrap up on just a couple of comments and we could turn this on as you'd like to, however you see to go next. But I do want to, these issues that we've raised, how do we integrate all of these community virtues and these challenges into our work? How do we incorporate these perspectives and our desire to strengthen communities and help position them and then actually help position Missouri to future realities and possibilities? We need to make post-high school pathways accessible and attainable. Not everybody's cut out for a four-year residential college experience, and that is just fine. But we do need to have good, strong alternatives that gets back to that point of something past high school. How do we get something so that people are prepared for a future workforce to meet the needs of Missouri? We can do that online or in person, but we need to do it in creative ways. And we need to do that through partnerships with local K-12 districts, with local industries. I've heard it said we need to be focusing on local solutions to local challenges. And as statewide higher education, what role can we play to help? Not come in and say, here's how it is, but how can we come in and say, how can we help you? What resources can we provide that can help you in your community? We need to find ways to help meet financial needs. And we do have good financial aid policies. We've got, the legislature's been generous, but we do need to find ways to make that work. And we need to make it more knowable and available. And we need to also find ways to help clarify that we're here to help strengthen communities, not detract from them. We're not asking people to leave and abandon their homes. What we're trying to do is help them understand you're investing in yourself, you're investing in your family. How can we help you get that done? So the questions, Matt, as I close, and I would suggest we take a look at these questions when the day is over. How might we as post-secondary and workforce development community better serve our rural regions? How might we strengthen the pathways to post-high school success to enhance workforce preparedness? And what are the opportunities that are presented today? What are the remaining barriers? How do we overcome them? How can we take a look and turn challenges into opportunities for a stronger Missouri? Those are the things I would put forward to us today, Matt. Representative, I thank you very much for your time today. And Matt, I'll open it back up to you to take as you'd like now.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Boggs. Thank you, Representative Shields, for being here. To the rest of our colleagues on the call, I just want to say personally, it's truly inspiring and encouraging that we have commissioners, we have a department with Samantha and her team, we have representatives who truly care about rural students and rural communities. I've had the privilege of working with colleagues and clients across the country, and a lot of them don't understand the needs that we're talking about. They don't understand why this is so pressing and why this is so critical. And it's really exciting to me to be in a state where from the topmost levels all the way down, people actually care about rural communities. So I think that's wonderful. So thank you for your opening remarks. Thank you, Representative Shields, for being here. And I also want to reiterate for everyone, really today, throughout the day, think about those three themes, those three challenges Dr. Boggs talked about. We have geographic challenges for rural students, financial challenges, and cultural challenges. So as you're going through your sessions today, your workshops, and you're listening and interacting, think about each of those and what you can be taking away and bringing back to your institution or organization. And we'll reiterate and talk about those at the end of the day as well. So we have a couple of minutes before we get to our opening keynote session. So Dr. Boggs, while we're here, I'd love to just get your perspective. You know, you're new to the state. Many of us have worked in the state for a real long time. I'd love to know your perspective, being new to the state, having worked in Colorado and Kentucky, growing up in North Carolina. What is your perspective on our work with Missouri's rural students? Would you give us an A+? Would you give us maybe a solid B? How do you think we're doing?
Well, that's a tricky question for a guy who's been here 7 months. I'll tell you, I'm certainly seeing a genuine commitment. And certainly I see people who are very dedicated to their homes and looking after their, as I was mentioning, looking after their families, looking after their communities, and they want to see them thrive. I'm not, you know, as I look at, I'm still learning demographics and how things in the regions play out. What I'm not seeing are mass migrations to our city centers. What I see are people who are wanting to stay put. And I'm impressed with how quickly we all try to work. The one quick example I would say is our department actually has a rapid response team following up after the Tyson plants. And I'm impressed at how hard local chambers of commerce and others are working to find ways not to change those situations over and everybody scatter, but finding ways to say what can come in, what can help replace this, how can everybody stay put? And so those are hard questions, but they're the right ones to ask. And I'm impressed at the commitment to people to stay at the table and talk things through. I was fortunate enough early. I've been trying to get out and around and see the state and meet people. I was down in Kennett, way down in Kennett, and I walked in thinking I would see the workforce. I was looking at the job center. The job centers are part of the department, and I always try to make sure to drop by and say hello and talk about what they're dealing with. I walked into a job center down in Kennett, and I walked in on, they had their waiting with the local chamber of commerce. They had, there was all of a sudden 5 or 6, 7 people, and they turned it into an economic development conversation right there on the spot. Caught me a bit off guard, but the fact that they had made time, the workforce board and all that, the fact that they had made time to be there, that I was coming through to see the job center and to learn about the place, and they wanted me to get an earful of what they wanted to see happen in their community. I was impressed by that. Again, I didn't have a lot of answers for them, but I think the fact they simply wanted to be shown some respect and listened to a little bit, and I was certainly willing to do that. So that kind of resilience, that can only be admired, and that says to me there's an energy here. We just need to find a way to channel it, and let's see if we can't come up with somebody who doesn't get some things done.
No, I really appreciate all that, especially the folks on the Job Corps, the job piece as well. So that's really wonderful. And as you were talking earlier, another piece that occurred to me or really resonated with me when you were talking about the financial piece is helping students and their families, whether that's parents, grandparents, or their own dependents, but helping families understand the cost of higher education. And one of the challenges, we don't have enough recruiters and financial aid professionals and just overall people who can go out to communities and explain in detail financial aid and the process and what it means to borrow loans. And I'm sure many sessions will talk on this today. We have so many first generation students in rural communities, so they don't have those trailblazers who can provide that education and that context, which unfortunately kind of reinforces or kind of creates the problem going forward again of we just don't have enough education. So again, I love that the commissioner or reps all the way down through our schools are really focusing on this, because a lot of times it's not anything the student is or isn't doing, it's just barriers in the way information is shared or the way the processes are set up. Well, this is excellent. So Dr. Boggs, any final thoughts before we move in? We're at a good spot, but we're a couple minutes early, but any final thoughts before we move into our keynote address?
I just want to say thank you, Representative. Again, I do thank you for your time and presence here today. I do appreciate the slate of speakers. Thank you for your time. Some of you are outside of Missouri. I appreciate the homework you've done to bring your information to us and for engaging with us here. And I do appreciate all of you who are participating to make this a good day. I would say, Matt, you've got the important role. But, I think many of us through the pandemic, we know how webinars work. Here's the secret, though, is if let's all pitch in and make today a success. Let's speak up and have some good conversations. And, let's not just lean on the presenter. Let's all pitch in and do our part and learn from each other. And that just means let's have some trust and understanding. We're all here focused on our rural communities, our friends and neighbors, and how can we lift Missouri up in these regions. What are some good ideas we can all take forward? We've all got a part to play. And thank you for your time.
Wonderful. And on that note, thank you, Dr. Boggs. On that note, we are going to move into our keynote address. Next on our agenda is our keynote entitled Towards a Brighter Future, How Rural Education Can Thrive, presented by Dr. Mike McShane. Dr. McShane is Director of National Research at EdChoice. He is an author, editor, co-author, or co-editor of 11 books on education policy, including his most recent, Hybrid Homeschooling, A Guide to the Future of Education. He is currently a opinion contributor to Forbes, and his analyses and commentary have been published widely in the media, including USA Today, The Washington Post, and The Wall Street Journal. He has been featured in education-specific outlets such as Teachers College Record, Education Week, Phi Delta Kappa, and Education Next. In addition to authoring numerous white papers, Dr. McShane has had academic work published in Education Finance and Policy, the Handbook of Education Politics and Policy, and the Journal of School Choice. A former high school teacher, he earned a PhD in education policy from the University of Arkansas, an MED from the University of Notre Dame, and a BA in English from our own St. Louis University. He is also an adjunct fellow in the education policy studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Suffice to say, like Dr. Boggs, this guy knows what he's talking about. We welcome comments, questions, and engagement throughout Dr. McShane's presentation, so please use the chat feature to let us know what you're thinking. I'll be keeping track of any questions or comments, and Dr. McShane will respond at the end of his session. Finally, again, please use and follow the hashtag MoEquity2023 on your social channels to keep the conversation going beyond this event. And now, Dr. McShane, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I really appreciate the kind of level setting that Dr. Boggs did this morning. I think he's asking the right questions, the important questions, and hopefully what I'm going to present here for the next 50 minutes or so will dovetail with that nicely. I just want to check, Matt, can you give me a thumbs up that the PowerPoint is looking correct? Okay, this is amazing. You would think this long into doing this, you wouldn't get those nerves right as the thing starts, but you just never know. Well, look, it is a real pleasure to be with all of you this morning. The topic of my presentation is Towards a Brighter Future, How Rural Higher Education Can Thrive. Now, I am a Missouri native. I grew up in Kansas City. And as was said, I went to college in St. Louis. So a lot of my experience as a young person, or even into my college years of rural Missouri, was that stretch of I-70 between Kansas City and St. Louis. Luckily, through later experiences in my life, I was able to see much more of the state, which I greatly appreciated. But to be honest, for a lot of my life, I think a lot of people who grow up in cities, we have misperceptions and misunderstandings of what rural Missouri, what rural America in general looks like. I want to share one brief picture of a much younger me. But this is actually where I got my start. I was a 9th and 10th grade teacher, English teacher in Montgomery, Alabama. And as part of that time, I was also a baseball coach. You can see this is me. Again, fewer gray hairs, perhaps better posture. Hadn't been hunched over a desk for another 10 or 15 years. But I was able to spend a lot of time trundling around rural Alabama on a school bus with these players and fellow coaches as we traveled to all these little towns of Notasulga and Lochapoka and Tuskegee and Selma. And if you have the chance to ever travel around rural Alabama, you recognize what an interesting, incredible, diverse, rich with history and culture place that it is. And I'm ashamed to say it took until my early 20s for me to realize that, oh, hey, wait a second. Like rural America is this fascinating, diverse tapestry of different cultures and races and religions and histories and nations of origin and all of these fascinating ways. In my time since then, I've been lucky to collaborate on projects with folks. I just recently did some work out in Arizona. But rural Arizona, I found just fascinating. I just wanted to talk to as many people as I could. Tell me about the Native American reservations and the issues that their schools are facing and student transportation and just this fascinating picture. And again, contrasted with, the West, the Pacific Northwest or the wilds of Alaska or the Northeast. Rural America is such a fascinating place, such an interesting place of study. So I consider myself quite privileged as a researcher to be thinking about these issues, these questions, these places. And I count all of you quite lucky to be able to work and live in such an interesting place. So what do I want to do in my talk with all of you today? The first thing I want to do is outline some kind of the big picture. Looking at some of the, if we want to think of kind of macro trends that are existing in higher education, both nationally, looking at all of higher education, zooming in a bit, looking at rural higher education, zooming in a bit more, looking at Missouri higher education, and just looking frankly at some of the cold hard numbers that are existing out there. I do in a lot of my day job work, public opinion polling, and I'm going to be able to share some of that, both polling that my organization has done and that other organizations have done, which I think could be of interest to folks. And then I want to spend some time, hopefully not too much, but certainly some time talking about the challenges faced by institutions of higher education in rural communities. It's important before I spend hopefully the most of my time on the opportunities and looking at some other places around the country that are doing cool and interesting things. But we need to be honest, not nihilistic about the challenges that exist, but sort of, and it'll dovetail with a lot of what Dr. Boggs was talking about, outlining some of the issues that rural communities face and rural higher education faces. But hopefully without lingering too long, we'll talk some of that. And then, like I said, we're going to get into the opportunities and where I can think that how rural institutions of higher education can really lead to transformational positive change for the state of Missouri. So without further ado, let's talk big picture. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out very, very far, and then we'll zoom in. So one of the first statistics that I looked at when I knew I was going to give this talk was looking at, this is data from the National Center for Education Statistics, NCES. It's the federal sort of statistical arm. This is from the 2023 Digest of Education Statistics. And this is the percentage of recent high school completers who enroll in college all the way back to 1960. And you can see the black line there is all students, and then the various other lines and shades of green and yellow are for different demographic groups. And you can see that the federal government started tracking different demographic groups at different times. But this is roughly the story that we see. So now when I look at this graph, I see a couple things, and maybe you all would see something different, but here's at least what I see when I look at this graph, is that a relatively slow but steady increase in the percentage of students who graduate from high school and then go on to college. We start in the kind of mid 40s in 1960, and we're north of 60% now. At the same time, when I look at this graph, I see that those rates kind of plateaued in the mid-aughts. I think that's what we call it nowadays, but in the sort of mid-aughts. and after plateauing for a bit, have actually kind of declined in the last couple of years. Now, it's important to note anytime you look at numbers like this that you want to be careful not to just take whatever the last 5 years trend is and extend it out into perpetuity. As you look throughout the history of these numbers, there have been peaks and valleys, there have been increases and decreases. The longer you can look back, the better. But while there has been this growth, there was at minimum a leveling off, and there's potentially a decrease in the percentage of high school completers who are enrolling in college. Now, I think that these numbers, and obviously you can look at how different racial and ethnic groups in America have compared to the national average and contributed to it. So that's the first thing, which is I think a lot of the story of this graph is at minimum a kind of stagnation in the percentage of high school completers who are enrolling in college, and potentially even a decline in that number. Now, if we think about what that means for higher education, the percentage of high school completers enrolling in college is kind of half of the equation, right? You have to apply that percentage to the total number of young people graduating from high school. Now, we have the trend data for that reaching out through the next decade. Deloitte put this together, but I think it's the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education. And they are projecting over the next decade a decline in the number of students who are graduating from high school. Next year, they predict something like 3.9 million, and that not in massive numbers, but at a decreasing rate down to 3.6 million in 2034-35. So if you connect these numbers to the numbers in the last slide, where we have a stagnating percentage of students, or potentially a decreasing percentage of students, high school completers going to college, and we have a decreasing number of high school completers, it's kind of a double whammy of potentially declines in enrollment in institutions of higher education. Now, again, that's sort of looking at numbers, making some of these projections. As I mentioned, I work for EdChoice, and we partner with an organization called Morning Consult. Many of you you'll recognize the graphs. They do a lot of political polling and others. But every month we poll a nationally representative sample of Americans. We oversample parents. We get a nationally representative sample of American parents, and we publish the results on a series of questions about education, some of which are sort of the same every month, and some of which we sort of follow the news and ask them questions about things that are happening. But periodically, we also poll other groups of interest to the world of education. So we would regularly poll teachers, we've polled parents of students in special education, and one of the more interesting groups that we've done some polling with are teens. So I think now we've done it 6 or 7 times in the last 3 years, but we find nationally, working with Morning Consult, we poll a nationally representative sample of American 13 to 18-year-olds and ask them a whole battery of questions about education. But I think relevant to our conversation and thinking about what students are doing after high school, we polled them, and this is actually quite recent. This was just in late August of this year. And we polled them asking them, thinking about your plans following high school, please select what your plans are now for next year. So the largest group, though still less than a third, say that they want to attend an in-state 4-year university. The next most popular would be to say that they're going out of state to a 4-year university. And then interesting, the next most popular two after that are I have no plans or I don't know. In fact, in August of 2023, almost a quarter of respondents said that they didn't know, that they had no plans, or that they didn't know. There's definitely some tapering off after that. And this actually compares, we did this poll roughly a year ago and then now, and you can see the sort of comparison between the two. The numbers don't change a whole lot. These things have been relatively constant. But we've seen, in-state community college, taking a gap year, joining the military, etc. Now, interestingly, and I think this does align to some of what Dr. Boggs was talking about thinking about preparation for students. Are we doing the best that we can to strengthen these pathways to help make sure that the students that are enrolling in whatever post-secondary option that they choose are prepared for it? We asked a very relevant question, and that was, do you feel prepared? So the way you read this graph is that for each of these bars is of those students who said they were going to that institution, were they prepared? So for the students who said that they were going to attend a four-year university or college, 13% said that they felt extremely prepared, and 20% said they felt very prepared. 47% said that they felt somewhat prepared. So combining the extremely and the varied, we're looking at less than a third of students that they felt either extremely or very prepared. I don't know what you all think about those numbers. Ideally, I think we would like to see those numbers be higher. And again, this is true also for students who say that they're going to attend community college. The same percentage, the numbers of extremely and varied are a little bit different, but roughly the same percentage said that they felt extremely or very prepared to participate. Now, again, a lot say that they're somewhat prepared, and this is asking teenagers their opinions. So we have to take all of these things with a grain of salt, and I want to put those things out there. And obviously, you all in your actual institutions will be able to see whether students are showing up actually prepared or not, and I think that's worth doing. But this is at least what they're telling us. This is what 13 to 18-year-olds told us recently. Okay, so all of this has been about higher education in general, looking all across the country. Now I want to kind of click in and zoom a little bit further to talk about rural higher education. And I found this very interesting research from some researchers at the University of Wisconsin-Madison tracking enrollment trends in various university types over the course of the last almost 20 years. Now, there's a few things happening here, right? And again, so this is comparing rural and non-rural. These are rates of enrollment change. So if the number is above 0, that means enrollment is going up. The steeper that line is, that's the more that it's going up. If it goes below 0, that means that enrollment is declining. And you can see the lines break down, whether that's rural or non-rural, and this is divided up between public associates, public bachelor's and master's, nonprofit, and for-profit. We'll set for-profit aside for a moment because that's its own kettle of fish. But when I look at these graphs, what I see is trend lines that were actually pretty connected to one another, rural and non-rural lines, depending on which one you're looking at for varying periods of time, but at least at the beginning parts of these graphs, where the trajectories of rural and non-rural schools were quite similar to one another. It's only after that time period that we started to see some separation between the two. And in almost all of those cases, or in all of those public associates, public bachelors, and nonprofits, it was the rural schools whose enrollments either declined or increased at a lower rate than their non-rural counterparts. Now, again, so for some of them, if we look at our public bachelors, if we look at our nonprofits, those numbers are still above 0. So that means enrollment is still growing in those institutions. It's just not growing as fast as in their non-rural peers. For public associates, we do see those numbers going down to the point where that the enrollment is actually going below 0. So then we talk about for-profits, right? If you look, the scale of the graphs are different, right? So all the others, it's a range of 40% growth at its peak on those graphs. This goes up to 240%. And again, this is one where you see sort of from the outset that the numbers are different from one another, that the rates are dramatically different from one another, and that rural is more likely than in non-rural, or the rate is higher in rural than in non-rural. One caveat here that may become a bit more apparent in the next slide that I show, when we're talking about percentage rates of change, the underlying numbers matter. So if there were a very small number of people enrolled in these institutions, so if you go from 10 students to 40 students versus 100,000 to 102,000 or something, like the total numbers might actually not tell the whole story, or the rates of change might tell the whole story of it. So I think it's at least something to think about. And so, now I can show you. This was, again, using NCES, the National Center for Education Statistics, the breakdown of higher education in Missouri by institution type. So obviously the most popular are public four-year institutions. The next most popular are private four-year institutions. And the next most popular, and pretty close, are public two-year institutions. And then there's a precipitous drop-off to everyone else. And so that's why we want to be careful when we talk about rates of change, because rates of change in a section of the population that educates like 2,000 students versus 110,000 students are different from one another. Okay, I hope that has done some level setting, some big picture of what we're talking about here, because now I want to get into thinking about challenges. Some challenges that institutions of higher education are facing in general, that rural are facing in particular, and I want to highlight two. Like I said, I don't want to linger too long on these. I don't in any way want to be fatalistic or nihilistic in looking at them, but we have to be honest about some of the realities so that as we look towards solutions, we understand the kind of realm of the possible. So the first, and this was, again, Dr. Boggs talked about this this morning, and I'm going to sort of put some numbers backing up exactly what he had to say, is demographic change. Some of you may have seen this headline recently in the Post-Dispatch that Missouri was one of 20 states to record more deaths than births for the last 3 years. Now, look, some of this has to do with COVID and the sort of differential impact that it had on people at various ages, which is its own sort of story. But birth rates in Missouri are down or slowing. And that's going to have knock-on effects to our K-12 education system and to our higher education system. Just people are having fewer kids. People having fewer kids means there's going to be fewer, at least in-state students to enroll in schools. That doesn't mean that there won't be other opportunities elsewhere, but it's definitely something worth thinking about. When we look at population trends by geography, we see a map like this. This was done by a great professor, or I don't know, he's great. I've never actually met the person, but put together some very useful data that I want to give credit to. And this is looking by county at population growth or decline across the state. Now, the rubric on the side there is kind of unclear. Why would they use these random fractions or decimals there? The reason is basically over this time period that this map looks at, which is from 2010 to 2020, the United States as a whole grew at a rate of 0.63%. That was the average rate of growth for the entire country. The state of Missouri as a whole grew at a rate of 0.26%. So looking at this chart, if you see yellow or green, that means that those counties grew at a rate below the Missouri average. If you see blue, that is something that grew above the Missouri average, but below the national average. And if you see the purple, those are counties that grew above the national average. And obviously to highlight, yellow is they actually declined in population. So green and blue green and yellow are below the average for the state, but green is still a positive population growth. Yellow is a loss of population. And, when I look at this, it's important to note, obviously we're spending time talking about rural Missouri today, and a lot of yellow exists in rural Missouri. That's true. It exists in urban Missouri too. I know that's not our topic of our conversation, but if you look at St. Louis there, this is an issue that's facing St. Louis as well. So this could be a place where it's not just sort of rural institutions of higher education that care about this, but other people do as well. Maybe an opportunity to build some bridges there. But again, we see places in Missouri of outstanding growth. Look around Springfield, sort of suburban and exurban, St. Louis, Columbia, suburbs of Kansas City as well. Jackson County is a little bit lower, but in the areas both of north and south of there, you can see that happening. But this is what it looks like, and we also see places where population growth above state average population growth is taking place in rural communities as well. So I think it's important to say we have to speak when we talk about population trends and others, we have to speak with some nuance around them. To talk about rural education, sort of rural communities in Missouri in general, well, it's like, well, which ones are you talking about? What parts of Missouri are you talking about? What communities are you talking about? It's important not to paint with too broad of a brush. Now, the other thing that's interesting is our friends at the Tipton R6 school district, I don't know if anyone here is affiliated with this, have this fantastic map, and I don't know if they got it from somewhere else, but I thought it was so interesting and useful. Again, I want to give them credit for that. We can actually take just that map that I just showed you and map our institutions of higher education, look right next to them, comparing them. So yellow dots are 4-year colleges and blue dots are 2-year colleges. And you can see places where population growth and institutions overlap, and then you can see some places where it doesn't. So I think, again, it's really important that we might have, you might identify someone as, oh, that's a rural institution, but it's a rural institution in a place where population is growing. Or, hey, that's a rural institution, but it's in a community where population is decreasing. The big picture takeaway from these last couple of slides is that there are absolutely demographic challenges, but we have to be careful and thoughtful about the way that we look at them and ground them in facts. So the second challenge that I want to highlight is around public sentiment around higher education in general. And like I said, a lot of the work that I do is in polling, but I'm not even going to use my polling to start this. I'm just going to go straight to our friends at Gallup. There are few people as respected as Gallup when it comes to highlighting these things. And they've been asking a question for a long time about various institutions of American life. So they ask a sort of series of questions. How much confidence do you have in? And they ask about Congress and the presidency and big business and the military and all sorts of these institutions of American life. And track over time how many people say that they are confident in them. So this is for higher education in America. And one of the things that you'll see, even just looking back to 2015, is a pretty serious decline in the percentage of people saying that they have confidence in higher education. So in 2015, 28% of respondents said that they had a great deal of confidence in higher education. That was down to only 17% by 2023. Those who said that they had very little confidence grew over this time period. In 2015, only 9% said that they had very little confidence in higher education, but by the time 2023 rolls around, it goes up to 22%. Now, these are averages. This is looking at Americans as a whole. It's important for us to dive in and look at some of the demographic details that Gallup reports and can make us think about, if we think about the demographic profile of Missouri or potentially of the communities that you're in, it may give you some understanding or at least an inkling of what they might be thinking about higher education. One of the things that Gallup saw was that this decline in confidence, and so these percentages here is they lumped together people who said they had a great deal of confidence in higher education and those who had quite a lot of confidence in higher education, and combine those two numbers, and this is what we're seeing here. What you see are declines in every single demographic group that they report here, but the declines are of varying sizes, right? So looking at political identification, Republicans saw the largest decline. While more than half of Republicans in 2015, 56%, said that they had either a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in higher education, that number dropped 37 percentage points down to only 19% by 2023. Now, Democrats saw a decline as well, but the decline was less and the baseline was higher. So they go from 68 to 59. We see variation by education level. Again, all of those education levels in 2015 were above 50%. More people said that they had a great deal or quite a lot of confidence than did not. And in these cases, they had postgraduate degrees hanging on there at 50-50, but 29, 47% for the others, those both have ended up underwater. And, there's gender differences that are there, that they're not, not massively different between them. But I also want to think about that last one. Now, look, I think maybe all of us on this call who do work in this field or who are interested in this, if we said, hey, we found this thing that confidence in higher education is going down. We broke it down by age. What group do you think would have the least amount of confidence? I think many of us might just sort of blindly presuppose that older Americans would think that way. And that's certainly true. They report the lowest levels of confidence. But I think it's really important for the work that you all are doing to look at that 18 to 34 group, that we see, again, the group that had the most confidence. 60% of 18 to 34-year-olds said they had a great deal or a lot of confidence in higher education. That is down to only 42%. So again, it's sort of under that 50-50 bar, underwater, as the sort of term of art. And I think that that's something that we really need to be thinking about, because those are likely the types of people that we want to engage in higher education or to think about higher education, even if they don't do it immediately after high school, that they're doing something at some point. And I think it's worth lingering for just one moment about this age group and people that are sort of aging into this group, because I think how they view the world will shape the work that we do with them. This is from another poll that we did actually last year, last spring. And it was a fun one. I mean, I guess, well, fun is a relative term. If you work in polling, this is fun. We actually polled teenagers and their parents. So we asked the same sort of within the same family unit, teens and their parents, a similar battery of questions so that we might be able to compare the ideas that each of those groups have. And this one, ever since we published this, I have been thinking about this figure. So we asked teenagers, when you're thinking about the future, which of these words best describes how you feel right now? And we gave them, they had like a little slider where if they said they wanted to say they were optimistic versus pessimistic or neutral in the middle, they would kind of slide a little toggle back and forth of what they were. And then we asked their parents, okay, thinking about your child's future, how do you feel about it? And look, maybe I was crazy for this to have shocked me, but I was really surprised by the fact that parents were so much more optimistic and hopeful for their children's future than their own children were. So they were much more likely to say that they're optimistic. They're much more likely to say that they're happy, that they're satisfied, that they're enthusiastic. And teenagers were just much less likely to do that. And I don't know, maybe this is my own bias, but I think back to my time as like a 16-year-old. I'd like to think I was pretty optimistic about the future. I had no idea what the heck was going to happen. And look, I don't know, maybe I was wrong to be optimistic about the future. That hasn't necessarily worked out the way we all thought it was going to, circa, I won't even say what year it was when I was 16. But I think that knowing that young people are less, the pessimistic numbers are not necessarily as high, but are certainly less optimistic. I think that should shape the way that we think about education, right? That optimism about the future or pessimism about the future shapes the way you want to invest in your own education, the way you want to plan for the future, the types of decisions that you make and the reasons that you make them. So I think it's important to understand that in the background, a lot of our young people both have lost confidence and are in higher education in specific. But to know that this is part of a broader sort of trend of, I think, just sort of increasing, or even if it's not increasing pessimism, a decrease in things like optimism and hope for the future. Okay, like I said, I did not want to linger too long on that, and I worry that those last couple of slides might be particularly demoralizing, but I don't want them to be. I think we have to be realistic about the challenges that exist. There's no point in burying our heads in the sand. So now let's pivot and let's talk about opportunities. Given all of those things that we know, how do we proceed forward? And where are other places, other institutions of higher education around the country, where are they doing things to take those realities into consideration and to do something innovative and interesting? So obviously, I think the first one, if we think about those early slides that I was talking about, where it's very likely that we are going to see decreasing numbers of students graduating from high school. We are going to see decreasing numbers of those students who graduate from high school matriculating into college. We need to think about new learners, right? How can our institutions serve students that are not the traditional high school leaver? And look, I want to say at the outset now, I totally know that your institutions are already serving lots of non-high school leavers. So I don't want to say that this is like I've got this idea. What if college kids weren't 18 to 22? Totally understand the changing face of higher education right now. But that having been said, being more strategic or interested in identifying these particular things. I mean, this is a great quote from sort of Deloitte, which is a good way to sort of frame our ideas. Just because one population is decreasing doesn't mean that another population isn't increasing. So finding those groups that are increasing in number, are increasing in interest, are increasing in need, that could be a real great opportunity for growth. And not to be too grandiose about it, but we're recognizing the changing nature of work. We're recognizing global trade. We're recognizing all of these things that require the need for reskilling, upskilling, further education. They're just the realities of what work is going to be for the next few decades. So getting in on that, recognizing that, I think is super important. So when I talk about new learners, it's sort of like, again, you've only got really two choices, right? You got adults and you've got sort of high school students or K-12 students. So over 18, younger 18. And I want to think about what might strategies look like, what might the data look like for these two groups, and what could be done to help them. So let's first talk about sort of the over 18. So these might be students of traditional college age or past that. And this is some data from the US Chamber of Commerce about upskilling and reskilling. And again, when I look at this graph, I see, I mean, the message that the US Chamber of Commerce wanted to tell us, that people that are in more vulnerable lines of work that could be done by AI or could be offshored, it could be any of those sorts of things, recognize that they need to reskill and that they need to upskill. If you work in customer service, if you work in administrative or secretarial work, you see the train that's coming down the tracks. And it's a wonderful thing to see that, looking at the polling and surveys that they did, people are seeing that they want to reskill, they want to upskill, and it's there. But one of the things, our friends at the chamber kind of violated one of the rules of graphs, which is, if you look at the y-axis there on the left, even the lower left corner there, that's more than half, right? Like more than half of people in what even they call lower risk jobs of social work or health and medicine or law or science and research and any of those sorts of things. More than half of them are saying that they want upskilling and they want reskilling. And now look, a lot of what sort of the chamber talks about is having, industry do this, but it doesn't have to necessarily be industry. And it's not clear to me always that industry is great at it. So I think this is this real opportunity where we see people telling us that they want to reskill, that they want to upskill. Amazon did a study with Gallup. This was done in 2021, so it's a little kind of COVID-y talking about, but some of the numbers that I thought that really stood out to me: 56% of workers in Missouri said that they were interested in upskilling. 42% said that they would leave their job if they had another opportunity to upskill somewhere else, which I thought was really interesting. And of those who upskilled, 67% of them said it improved their quality of life. So people want to upskill. Those who do upskill are happy that they have done it. And people are willing to do things to upskill. They're willing to change jobs. They're willing to take steps in order to make that happen. Now, again, I don't know what the latest BLS data on open jobs, but that was at least those are a couple interesting data points around interest in upskilling, interest in reskilling, people who want this sort of stuff. So now comes the question that there's the opportunity. What is the how? How can institutions of higher education do this kind of upskilling, reskilling, reaching out to new populations? One of the most interesting trends that I have seen in institutions is actually inspired by this picture here. Some of you may be familiar with this. This is actually the map of United Airlines. This is their route map. And this is a particular kind of organization that sprung up post airline deregulation in the 1970s and in the 1980s. Historically, airline routes actually operated more like trains. We go a long way down the story of all of this. They were actually regulated more like trains. And so you had a lot of north and south routes, and you had east and west routes. And the problem was, if you wanted to go northeast or southwest or southeast, it could actually be quite challenging to manage those connections, etc. So after deregulation takes place in the 70s and 80s, they move to what this is known as now, which is a hub and spoke model. So you have airlines like United, they operate hubs: Chicago, Denver, San Francisco, secondary hubs in places like Los Angeles and Houston and Washington, D.C. And if you need to fly somewhere, rather than connecting in sort of random locations based on a grid, you fly into one of the hubs and then fly out from the hub along what we would call spokes. Think of like the spokes on a bicycle wheel. And this allows for more efficiency and effectiveness in that these airlines can have all of their logistics people and their maintenance and extra airplanes and all of that stuff sitting in these few hubs, and they can fly in and out based on their various needs for the day. And they can sort of circulate all of those people through the same area. So why did I just do 2 minutes on the way United Airlines chooses to fly its people? It's because some institutions are trying a similar model with respect to the courses that they offer. I want to highlight Montana State University, definitely something worth looking into. They're thinking about how to offer hub and spoke courses and programs. So a good example of this, they're doing it in a fair number of these different courses, is like their respiratory therapy program. Obviously, they're recognizing a huge amount of growth in the healthcare field. There's a lot of quite remunerative jobs in healthcare that maybe don't need 4-year degrees, but need a couple years of training. A respiratory therapy would be a very good example of that. But one of the big problems with a lot of these courses is that you need either clinical experience or lab experience or some kind of like in-person placement for some period of time in order to get the degree, the certification, etc. Well, unfortunately, that has meant for a lot of people, these degrees or these programs can only be offered in places that have those lab facilities or have those clinical opportunities, and you need to move there while you're pursuing this course. And a lot of people, as Dr. Boggs brought up, don't want to do that, right? They say, well, I can't move for 2 years or 18 months even or whatever. So I'm not going to participate in that course. What Montana State said was, whoa, what if we think about a hub and spoke model where people will attend a hub institution, which is ideally located close to them. And if you think about, you want to talk about sort of distance issues, Montana, my goodness. But you would stay at your hub institution, and then any of those additional things you need to do would be in limited duration for specific periods, specific purposes, sort of coming out on the spoke, doing the thing that you need to do, and then coming back to your hub institution. So that might mean rather than having to move somewhere for 2 years, you need to go somewhere for 2 weeks. Or you might need to find other ways of making that work. Some of this stuff can be done online. There's lots of different ways of doing that. But rather than trying to say, hey, listen, we need to locate all of these things in the same place, we can have these kind of hubs and spokes. Out on the spokes are clinical facilities, lab facilities, in-person placements, wherever these things sort of work, come in and out of those. Okay, that was talking about sort of adults, retraining, upskilling, all of those things. I actually come from much more of a K-12 background. I'll put my bias out here, where I think there are tremendous opportunities for new learners is in the K-12 space. Now, why do I think that? Luckily, buttressing a point that I was going to make anyway, but was helpful, just last week in the Washington Post, their great graphics team put this map together. This is the percentage increase in homeschooled students since 2018. Now, Missouri, unfortunately, is not included in this. Different states have different reporting requirements, so we can know. But I think if we look at all of the states around Missouri, look at the growth in Kentucky, in Tennessee, in Arkansas, in Kansas, in Nebraska, in South Dakota, and it's, again, there's something you're seeing in states all across the country, there's this tremendous growth in homeschooling. We've seen it during the pandemic. We're seeing it post-pandemic. And a lot of people have a misunderstanding of how homeschooling works. I think there's a perception of homeschoolers that they just learn from home, their parent is their teacher, their siblings are their only classmates. And I think the best research that we have on this, there's Albert Cheng, who's at the University of Arkansas, and Dan Hamlin, who's at the University of Oklahoma, did a great paper on this recently. They found that really that's only about 20 to 30% of homeschoolers. Only about 20 to 30% of homeschoolers just learn full-time from home, parent as primary educator. The other 70 to 80% participate in co-ops, attend public school part-time, hire tutors, take courses from outside providers. And I think this is where a tremendous opportunity exists. a lot of homeschooled students, as they reach the high school grades, their parents become less comfortable in tackling more advanced subject matter, your calculus, your chemistry, your physics, your foreign languages, etc. And they are looking for course providers to do either dual enrollment or just frankly just enrolling in the classes and taking them. So I think creating connections with the local homeschooling community, working with them to identify needs that they have, that courses that they would like to see or support programs they would have, I think is just an absolutely tremendous opportunity in a growing population of people who I think would definitely take you up on it. Related to that, Missouri has the MOCAP program. And I don't know how familiar folks are with this, but this is for students in traditional public schools and public charter schools and private schools. I think homeschooled students can participate in this as well. It's more sort of directly managed by the State Department of Education, but this allows students to take even sometimes just a one-off class from an outside provider while still being enrolled in their sort of traditional school of record. A lot of this was actually the genesis of this program came from rural communities there were some school districts who weren't able to offer things like calculus or physics because they just didn't have the students for it. They couldn't hire a teacher for it. And even if they had the students, they struggled to hire teachers for it. So this program was created to say, hey, listen, if you have a student who wants to take calculus while the rest of their classmates take a left and go in the classroom to learn algebra 2, because that's the highest level that we offer at this school, you can take a right into the library and you can take a course from an outside provider. And again, it's all paid for by the state. It's free for students. The state reimburses and does everything. It's been in existence for a few years now. And one of the things that I looked just before this was looking at who the providers are. And it turns out there's a smattering of sort of the traditional online learning providers, but these are people in the state of Missouri who have MOCAP courses. And it's a really interesting mix. You've got some suburban school districts, some city school districts. I would particularly encourage people to check out the Springfield Public Schools, the launch, their whole thing that they built for this and offering the online courses. Like they really leaned into this, created some really interesting stuff. But when I look at this, I see only one institution of higher education, and that's Mizzou, right? Now, I get someone may be shouting at their screen right now about why their institution couldn't do this. It's not immediately clear to me why you're not able to. There may be some barriers that I'm unaware of. But I think that this is absolutely, whether the sort of first population I was talking about, where it would just be much more informal, trying to identify those students and see if there are courses that work for them. This is a more formal process. I think you're vetted by the state. You become part of a kind of bank of courses that are available. But again, I mean, Mizzou is doing it. School districts are doing it. So I think there's definitely an opportunity there as well. I would be remiss if I made all the way through here without doing at least one more Alabama shout out. I do want to highlight a rural institution of higher education. The University of West Alabama, just a couple years ago, opened its own school. It looked at the challenges of the students in its community. They wanted to recruit more students from where they were and recognized that the local schools weren't doing as well as they would have liked them to. So they partnered with an organization. They set the school on the edge of campus. They partnered, the student teachers and practicum students can go into that school. I'm always nervous being hundreds of miles away from somewhere of saying something has been a success. But I mean, there's certainly interesting that it opened in 2018. It has now tripled in size. Based on the test score data that we have, it seems to outperform neighboring schools. And its charter was just re-upped. It went through a reevaluation process after its first couple years of operation. It was re-upped for 5 more years, which is usually a good sign. But one of the most fascinating things is that unfortunately in Sumter County, where UWA is located, their public schools are still horrifically segregated. You had lots of white flight into private schools. You just had a really sort of terrible situation there. And one of the things that happened when the school opened was that they were purpose in trying to have a basically 50-50 mix between white and black students. And even as the school has tripled in size, I should say it opened with about a 50-50 mix of white and black students. 3 years later, and almost tripling in size, that's actually stayed the same. So the actual student population didn't change over time. So I think it's actually a really interesting school. a really interesting model, something to think about. I know the chartering laws in Missouri are different. Where schools can operate is different, but it's something to think about, thinking about getting in the sort of direct provision of K-12 education if you're frustrated with the sort of pipeline pathways of students into your schools. The second big opportunity, so that was all talking about new students, right? Whether that's students that are in K-12, other sort of what we might call non-traditional, though are increasingly traditional students. The other, I think, big opportunity, big area of growth is with remote workers. This was from a recent Forbes article, but we're seeing a tremendous amount of growth in remote work. Could be something like almost a quarter of the American workforce working remotely. And if we look at a lot of these trends, what we see is people leaving a lot of big, high-cost cities, oftentimes for like the K-12 schools aren't great and there are concerns about crime. There are people who want to get out into nature. They don't want to be stuck commuting every day. So there's lots of reasons to think that Missouri in general and rural Missouri in particular would be a really welcome location for remote workers to go. And I just pulled some data from Redfin, and we can see, we can see the communities in Missouri that are growing. Using sort of house sale price as a proxy for desirability, which I think is a fair one, but there may be some supply constraints in some places. Look at the rates of sales price growth in Rolla and in St. Joseph. And I get some of these are sort of suburban or exurban. This is sort of metro type areas. So St. Louis, again, we saw that growth in sort of St. Charles County and other places like that, which is in a lot of this. But Lebanon is definitely a more rural community. Some of these places, Raymore and Warrensburg, I definitely, do we want to call them still suburban or exurban? But these are the types of places, your Rollas, your Warrensburgs, your Raymores, your Wildwoods, your Gladstones, your St. Josephs. These are places where clearly people want to move. And these may be people just moving from Kansas City or St. Louis, but it could be people moving from a lot of different places. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity there, low cost of living, all of the stuff that Dr. Boggs talked about, strong, tight-knit communities, so many positive things of living there that I think is this great opportunity. So I do want to highlight a couple things. The great state of Maine created a program, remote work for me, I guess you call it, or using its little abbreviation there, where they're really leaning into their community college system is really leaning into remote work. You think about how beautiful Maine is, you think about how close it is to these big cities. So they've done a couple things that I think are worth thinking about. The first is obviously being really thoughtful about what jobs are going remote, and are there preparation programs for those jobs that they could offer. So they saw so many things in the medical field, medical coding, IT support, virtual assistant work, all of that sort of stuff, and said, okay, cool. That's where remote work is happening. If we want those people to be doing remote work here, let's create programs to prepare people for them. Now, they actually partnered with philanthropy. It's grant funded. It's free for students. So I think that's like an incredible opportunity. But then also, so not just creating whole new courses, but looking at these much smaller micro things, offering these digital badges and micro credentials, specifically reaching out to remote workers. So one is sort of for the remote worker. They've created this program in Remote Work Essentials. Part of it's about the kind of psychology of remote work and, maintaining your mental health in a more isolated area. And a lot of it's like really practical stuff. How to use Slack, how to use SharePoint, how to use video conferencing. As someone who's on WebEx here, like working through those sorts of things, which I think is really valuable. And the other one, which is, of course, I think is super interesting. I don't know if they let non-Maine people sign up for it, but, leading remote and hybrid teams, as so many businesses become, some people are remote and some aren't, or some people are working hybrid. Anybody who's been involved in work like that realizes like the complications show up pretty darn quickly. If you have people working in different states, they have different tax policies and benefits and labor law and all of those things. It's really complicated. And while it sounds great, hey, we can hire someone in some new state, there's a lot of things on the back end that need to be done. So creating specific courses for those people, and this is a kind of interesting, part of it's self-paced work, part of it's done with sort of simultaneous Zoom classes. Again, really leaning into hybrid workers, remote workers, how can we provide things for them. One other opportunity, now this isn't necessarily in a rural institution. I don't know how rural we call West Lafayette, Indiana, but I think it's something worth thinking about, something interesting, hopefully something thought-provoking. This is the Convergence Center at Purdue. And this is a space that they built on the edge of their campus that is a mix of kind of meeting rooms and co-working facilities and small offices. Obviously think of Purdue Boilermakers, they're a big engineering school. Lots of industries want to have, even if it's a small footprint, they want to have a little footprint on campus, so you can have a little small office here if you want. But a lot of it is space for students and professors who are doing research, and all of these great minds do, as the name implies, converge in one place. So I think of like the co-working stuff. Maybe people want, if you're going to be working remotely, or if you're going to be working, you'd rather be in a place that has some energy to it, right? You'd rather be on a college campus. And even co-working facilities. Maybe you work from a coffee shop somewhere or something, but we all know college campuses have a great energy to them. They have lots of interesting young people that are participating in them. So I think it's definitely an interesting idea that's there. So I'll just close with 3 thoughts, right? Some conclusions and takeaways that I hope can shape the work that you all are doing, the really important stuff that you're doing for students here in Missouri. The first is when it comes to thinking about public opinion about higher education. We looked at those broader trends of what people think about higher education, and it's important to note 2 things. Number one, look, trust in institutions in America has been going down for decades, right? So if you look at Congress, if you look at the presidency, if you look at the healthcare system, actually everywhere except the military, we've seen trust going down. So it's not like higher education is alone in this. But there is a phenomenon, particularly see with political polling, where folks will give Congress a very low rating of favorability or confidence. But when you ask about their specific congressperson, they'll say, oh no, I actually like him or I like her. And I think that this is an opportunity and something that's very important for people involved in institutions of higher education. You want to be that, right? Knowing that maybe many people in your community will have a low level of confidence about this sort of inchoate idea of higher education, but say, oh, but this school is great. Or I'd be very happy to send my child there, or I'm happy to donate money, or I'm happy to collaborate, or whatever it is. I think there's not a lot that you can do about overall impressions, but you can see this phenomenon, and I think it's something that you want to go towards. Again, as I brought out, I think as you're looking for opportunities, it's this idea of look younger and look older. So look for students that are in those high school ages, whether they're in homeschooled, whether they're looking for dual enrollment opportunities, whether they're participating in MOCAP, whether they're, in standalone schools. So many opportunities for new student populations. And then obviously looking older as well. Hub and spoke type models, looking for people who want to upskill, who want to reskill. They're out there, they're hungry for this. It's a great opportunity. And then the last bit is thinking of your institution as this location of convergence, whether that's people who are working remotely, it's people that are doing research, it's industry, it's young people, it's all of these people converging in one place. It's a crossroads of all of those different folks. And thinking about reconfiguring space, again, you may not be able to do something like Purdue did and build a brand new, whatever, however big of a building that is. But you could reconfigure space on your existing campus to say, hey, this is a place for remote workers. This is a place for, small industry offices, to keep that energy and to reach out to these various folks. So I'll go ahead and stop there. I think there were some questions, in the chat, but I think we have about, 8 or 10 minutes or so. So I'm happy to answer them to the best of my ability.
Thank you so much, Dr. McShane. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you for sharing all of that data, data points that I would have even thought to include in these conversations. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, we had a couple questions and comments come in. So going back very on, actually, Representative Shields had a question. Representative Shields, I hope you're still here. Many teens are uncertain what they need in college, so they may feel unprepared. Has the question been asked to students who attended college if they felt prepared for their first year? And this question, I can't remember exactly when it came in, but it was earlier on in your conversation.
And
No,
it was.
totally.
It was earlier on when you showed the slide that said that students didn't feel prepared for their first year in school, for college.
Absolutely. So we have not asked that particular question. That's a fantastic one. I'm trying to think of if other researchers have. There's a sociologist named Richard Arum, A-R-U-M, who put out a book a couple years ago. I'm forgetting the name of the book, but he did a lot of detailed survey work of actual college students. I don't remember if he included those type of preparation questions or if he was just looking at the work that they were doing currently. But I would look, that would be my first port of call. If I was trying to get an answer to that question, I would look at Richard Arum's work.
Okay. There's just a lot of uncertainty, especially if you're a first generation student. You really don't know what college is, and it's been built up so much. You have no idea if you're prepared or not. And once you get there, you might find that you're prepared, but I'm not sure you could ever prepare a student for a 400 class lecture hall that's coming from any high school in the state of Missouri. So there are some, there are some difficulties there too. But thank you for that. I just want to know if our students still fall unprepared. So thank you.
No problem.
Great. And then we had a couple of comments that came in from my friend Lee Kolb at East Central College, which is out in Union, Missouri, about an hour outside of Missouri, or outside of St. Louis. This data doesn't surprise me at all. She teaches at community college. Teenagers are feeling much more overwhelmed and less hopeful. They report feeling pressures from external forces to know exactly what job they want at younger and younger ages, and are getting explicit anti-college messages in their lives as well. So that was her first comment. And then she also made a great comment about the remote work, but why don't you respond to that one first?
No, I think that's totally true. I mean, I think young people today, I hate to sound, when talking, look at these youths, but one of the things that I do think about is just how they are bombarded with negativity. They're bombarded with negativity about college, absolutely. They're kind of bombarded with negativity about life. They're constantly, and I think, look, we could probably go further down the rabbit hole, but it seems like a lot of the data that's coming out from social media companies and others is saying, like, we kind of know that has a negative effect on students. Or young people, they're comparing themselves to others, and they're always seeing everyone else living their best life, and they're like, wait a second, I'm not living my best life. And then there's obviously, and look, there's great uncertainty in the world, and all of those things are happening. So look, I think that the way I always try to square that circle when I talk to young people, I speak on college campuses, I spend all of those times, is to say, look, your life will be challenging, but one of the great things we can do is we can look back at history, right? And say, like, humans, Americans, whatever, have really had to overcome some really, really challenging things over time, but we're still here. We did it. And so trying to give people both the reality of the world that they're going to face, but also empower them to say, but you have the tools inside yourself, and we want to help you generate even more of them to be able to overcome those issues. To me, that's the sort of tone that needs to be struck. And I think too frequently it isn't. It's either denying the problems and saying, what are you talking about? You're living in like the best time ever, so who are you to complain? Which isn't necessarily helpful. Or it's being kind of nihilistic and fatalistic and saying, well, it doesn't matter what you do, there's nothing that can happen. I think striking both of those things, saying you're moving into a challenging world, but you want to prepare yourself for it, and you are capable and able to tackle that, I think is an important note to strike.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. And I want to go on. Lee made also a great comment in there about remote work possibilities for rural areas to help bolster the argument that we not neglect liberal arts bachelor's degree bound students who could gain academic credentials and eventually live in rural areas while benefiting from remote work opportunities. And that's one of the things I think we all saw coming out of the pandemic, is that remote work can happen in rural communities depending on the broadband. It's just adjusting and updating our view and our framework for that. And we did just have a great question come in from Laura Winter of the Scholarship Foundation of St. Louis. Laura says, New America's 2023 Varying Degree Survey showed that when we asked about the minimum level education close family need to be financially secure, about 70% said a certificate or degree. But people also think it costs too much and takes too much time, I assume meaning going to college. There's a lot of attention now on tightening the pipeline from K-12 to post-secondary through something like dual enrollment. Thoughts on these kind of initiatives for rural students?
No, I mean, I think I would say that I'm quite bullish on them. I mean, again, we've created these sort of quasi arbitrary lines between high school and college, right? And said that these are completely different institutions from one another, or the way they're going to operate is very different. And I think that what we're seeing is a fair number of high schools in the innovative space, and these are traditional public schools, either public charter schools, either private schools, experimenting with more college-like schedules and classes and coursework and others, to both because it's a way for students to potentially learn better, but also to prepare students for college, saying, listen, maybe if you're using the traditional 45-minute classes and a bell and whatever, if that's all you've ever known, and then you rock up to a college campus, it's like, oh, maybe lots of people don't know necessarily how to handle that. So yeah, smoothing those lines out, but I think the opportunity to say, look, if you're a senior in high school and you're planning to go to college, enrolling in one course online would be great. And honestly, it's like even enrolling in it for non-credit or finding some way to do that, just to understand this is what the pacing is like. These are what the expectations look like. These are the standards that you're going to be held to. I think that would be great. And then obviously there's ways to formalize this, because as much as possible, if we can get students college credit while they're still in high school, I mean, that's amazing. If we sort of tighten that connection, and because, hey, we've already started earning credit, so we want to keep moving with this. So I just think that's it's a tremendous opportunity, and things we should definitely be leaning into more, for sure.
Well, we are unfortunately out of time. Thank you so much, Dr. McShane, for just an incredibly in-depth and just really thought-provoking presentation. Thank you for starting us off on a great step for this day. Thank you, everyone, for being here with our keynote address. We now have a break until 10:45 a.m. Please get up, stretch your legs, grab some coffee. When we return, we have 3 breakout sessions to choose from. You can log in directly to the link of your choice on the agenda. There will also be a link in the chat. So you have 3 options for the next one, in about a 15-minute break. We will see you back here in just a little bit. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. McShane.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Thank you so much, everyone, for attending the 2023 Equity Summit, Advancing Innovation in Rural Education. As Samantha and I were just talking about, this was a day of amazing sessions. We had great guest speakers. We had our commissioner. We had a state representative join us. Just truly a really inspiring day. I want to wrap up personally and just say, I want us to focus on the challenges and the guiding questions that Dr. Boggs brought up this morning. The challenges that we have, the 3 biggest ones are geographic, financial, and cultural. What can we as educators and professionals do to address those challenges and address it quickly so we can really create change for our rural students and rural communities? And then Dr. Boggs also gave some guiding questions for the day that I want us to now take time to repeat and really reflect on as we go forward in our days and back to our work. First, how might we as the post-secondary and workforce development community better serve our rural regions? How might we strengthen the pathways to post-high school success to enhance workforce preparedness? And what opportunities are presented today? What are the remaining barriers? How do we overcome the barriers and strengthen our rural communities for a stronger Missouri? So I think those are excellent guiding questions, because it's not just about getting students to college. This is about the health of our workforce, of our state economy, and the future of our state. So I'm so glad Dr. Boggs was able to contextualize that for us. I am so honored to have done this for the 2nd year in a row. Thank you to Samantha and her team for allowing me to serve as the MC for the day. And then I'm going to hand it over to Samantha for her to give us our final wrap up.
Thanks, Matt. And thank you to all of you who attended and contributed to all of the conversations that we've had throughout the day. I mean, we can put these sessions on and we can speak to nobody, but having you all attend and engage with us and push back and offer your own perspectives, that's what really makes, I think, these Equity Summit sessions the most enriching conversations that we have. So thank you to all of you who lent your time today and your experience. We really appreciate it. We will have some follow-up after this. We'll ask you, to provide your feedback on what you thought of the sessions in a form of a survey. So be on the lookout for that. And then, of course, we will have recordings and everything live on our department YouTube page. So we'll make sure to include those in our follow-up note as well. Matt, anything more you'd want to add?
Nope, that's it. Just thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to the department and the staff and all the wonderful people who put this together. And have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.